I always believed that some people were meant to be invisible. My name is Lila, and I had spent most of my life blending in with the greenery that surrounded my uncle's small cottage on the edge of the billionaire's estate. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's dive into a world where truth and betrayal dance together. Ready? Let's begin. My uncle was the head gardener, a quiet man with dirt-caked hands and a heart as gentle as the soil he tended. The billionaire, Mr. Hawthorne, rarely paid attention to the people who worked for him, let alone the meek-knees who tagged along, sketching in the shade of the towering cypress trees. Each morning, I'd rise with the sun and pad barefoot through the dewy grass, a battered sketchbook tucked under my arm. My uncle would let me help him prune the rose bushes or weed the neat rows of herbs, but I always felt more at home when I was alone, lost in the twisting vines of my imagination. I drew things that no one else seemed to notice. The way the sunlight turned the leaves translucent, the hidden birds' nests in the hedges, the delicate patterns in the bark of the ancient oaks. Mr. Hawthorne was a man of cold elegance and sharp suits, his presence as commanding as the mansion that loomed over the gardens. I'd see him stride across the courtyard, always with an air of impatience. He never looked my way. To him, I was just another fixture in the background, like the weathered statues or the stone fountain that gurgled softly even on the hottest days. That was fine with me. My world was quiet, and I preferred it that way. But there was something about those mornings, the crisp air filled with the scent of earth and roses, that made me feel alive. My uncle would hum old folk tunes as he worked, his fingers moving deftly through the soil. Sometimes he'd pause to watch me sketch, his eyes twinkling with pride. "One day, little Lila," he'd say, "someone will see the world the way you do." I'd smile, but I never believed him. In the grand scheme of things, I was nobody. Just a gardener's niece, lost in a world of graphite and green dreams. I'd heard rumors about Mr. Hawthorne's company, about how he'd built an empire from nothing, luxury real estate, high-end fashion, even a chain of gourmet restaurants. But lately, the whispers had shifted. His empire was in trouble. There were scandals about environmental harm, about how his properties were built on land that should have been protected. The press called him out of touch, a relic of old money who didn't understand the new world. My uncle would cluck his tongue and shake his head when he read the headlines, but Mr. Hawthorne never showed any sign of worry. He was too busy being the king in his castle to notice the storm brewing around him. One afternoon, as I sat cross-legged under the ivy-covered trellis, I caught a glimpse of Mr. Hawthorne through the rose garden's archway. He was on his phone, his brow furrowed in irritation. His voice was a low murmur, but I could tell he was angry. Papers rustled in his hand, pamphlets and glossy images that fluttered in the breeze. He didn't see me. He never did. But in that moment, something shifted. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the brief crack in his polished armor. And for a heartbeat, I wondered what it would be like if he could see what I saw. If he could see the potential in the earth and the leaves, the quiet beauty that pulsed beneath the chaos. I didn't expect it to happen the next morning. I was tracing the outline of a new design in my sketchbook, a vision of the estate's gardens reimagined as a living tapestry of sustainability. Rainwater-catching sculptures, solar-lit pathways, native plants that would thrive without wasteful irrigation. My mind buzzed with possibilities. I didn't hear him approach until his shadow fell over my page, blocking out the sun. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked up, startled. Mr. Hawthorne's gaze swept across the page, his expression unreadable. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cool and dismissive. My throat went dry. "Just ideas," I managed to whisper. He frowned, his eyes narrowing as he studied the intricate lines and the notes scrawled in the margins. For a moment, he seemed almost curious. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, and just like that, he turned away, his attention consumed by the demands of his empire. As he walked back toward the mansion, my uncle came to stand beside me, his face a mix of concern and quiet pride. "Don't be afraid to dream, Lila," he said softly. But I was afraid. afraid that even my dreams weren't enough to matter in a world that belonged to men like Mr. Hawthorne. I pressed my pencil harder into the page, the graphite smudging under my fingertips. I couldn't stop drawing. It was the only way I knew how to speak, even if no one ever listened. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. I watched Mr. Hawthorne from afar as he stalked the grounds, his phone pressed to his ear, his mind 1,000 miles away. The estate staff moved around him like ghosts, careful not to draw his attention. I retreated deeper into my sketches, filling page after page with visions of green roofs and water gardens, of spaces where nature and human ambition could coexist in harmony. My uncle would peek at my drawings in the evenings, nodding approvingly but saying nothing. He knew better than anyone how fragile dreams could be. It wasn't until a week later that everything changed. I was in the greenhouse, surrounded by the warm, humid air and the sweet scent of orchids, when Mr. Hawthorne walked in. His suit jacket was slung over his arm, and there was a tightness around his eyes I hadn't seen before. He looked at me, not through me, and my heart pounded. "Show me what you're working on," he said simply. My hands trembled as I opened my sketchbook, turning it toward him. The silence between us stretched thin as he flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the designs that had lived in my mind for so long. I watched his expression shift from skepticism to something else. Something like realization. He didn't say a word, but I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. And in that moment, I knew that the invisible girl had finally been seen. The weight of his gaze on my sketches was both terrifying and electrifying. I stood frozen as Mr. Hawthorne flipped through each page, the air between us charged with an intensity I'd never felt before. He didn't speak at first, but his eyes told me more than words could. He lingered over my drawings of vertical gardens climbing the mansion's walls, my notes about water reclamation and solar-integrated pathways. Each detail seemed to challenge his carefully curated world, to offer a softer, more sustainable vision of luxury. And I couldn't help but wonder what he saw in those lines. If he saw the future I dreamed of, or just a naive girl's impossible fantasies. He closed the sketchbook and looked up, his sharp features momentarily softened by something I couldn't name. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. My mouth went dry. I read, I stammered. I study. Nature, design, harmony. I see how it could be different. How beauty doesn't have to cost the earth. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. My uncle always said there was strength in gentleness, and I clung to that now. Mr. Hawthorne nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "These are impressive," he said, and though his tone was still measured, I caught a flicker of intrigue. But ideas are one thing. Implementing them is another. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I knew he was right. My sketches were just that, dreams on paper, fragile and untested. But they were mine, and for the first time, someone like him was taking them seriously. He handed the sketchbook back to me, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said abruptly, his eyes already moving to the horizon beyond the glass. "I want to hear more about these ideas." And with that, he turned and walked out of the greenhouse, leaving me breathless and shaken. My uncle appeared from behind a row of ferns, his eyes wide with quiet wonder. "You've caught the lion's eye, Lila," he murmured. "Be careful. He'll want to see how you roar." That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in bed, the sketches spread around me like a patchwork of possibility. My mind raced with what tomorrow might bring, fear and excitement tangling in my chest. I thought of the greenhouse, of the way Mr. Hawthorne's eyes had softened when he saw my work. And I thought of all the ways this could go wrong. I was just a gardener's niece, after all. Who was I to advise a billionaire on how to save his crumbling empire? Morning came too soon, and I rose with the dawn, my hands trembling as I dressed in the only blouse I owned that didn't smell faintly of soil. My uncle offered me a reassuring smile as I left, his weathered hand squeezing my shoulder. "Trust what you see," he said simply. "It's worth more than you know." I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. I'd spent so long in the shadows, content to watch the world from the edges. Now, I was being asked to step into the light, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. Mr. Hawthorne's office was in the oldest wing of the mansion, a place of mahogany and marble that smelled faintly of leather and ambition. I hesitated outside the heavy door, taking a deep breath before I knocked. His voice called me in, and I pushed the door open to find him standing by the window, his silhouette framed by the morning sun. Papers littered the desk, but his eyes were on me. "Lila," he said, his voice calm, almost inviting. "Come in." I crossed the threshold, my heart pounding, and he gestured for me to sit. "I've been thinking about your designs," he began, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of his chair. "They're refreshing, unconventional. But if we're going to explore this, I need more than sketches. I need a plan." His words were measured, but there was no mistaking the curiosity in his tone, a curiosity that sparked something deep inside me. I swallowed hard, gathering my courage. "I've been working on some proposals," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I pulled a folded sheet from my sketchbook, a rough outline of how his properties could incorporate eco-friendly designs without sacrificing their luxury image. Rainwater recycling, green roofs, organic materials sourced from local artisans. As I spoke, my hands moved instinctively, tracing lines in the air, painting pictures with words as vivid as any drawing. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. For the first time, I felt like I was speaking to a man, not a myth. The billionaire and the girl in the garden, two strangers finding common ground in a vision of what could be. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he leaned back in his chair, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You're serious about this," he said quietly. "You see something I don't." I nodded, my throat tight. "I see how it could be, not just profitable, but meaningful. People want more than glass and steel now. They want connection, to nature, to purpose. Your brand could be the bridge." The words spilled out of me, a torrent I couldn't stop. And as I spoke, I felt something shift inside me. A confidence I hadn't known I possessed. The invisible girl was finding her voice, and it felt like coming home. Mr. Hawthorne stood, his expression inscrutable. "I'll arrange for you to meet with the board," he said. "They'll need convincing, but you've already convinced me." My breath caught in my throat. The board. The thought of standing in front of those powerful men and women, defending my dreams, it was terrifying. But it was also thrilling. A chance to show them, to show the world, that there was more to luxury than excess. That even the quietest voices could change the shape of things. As I left his office, the mansion seemed different, less imposing, more alive. My uncle was waiting for me in the garden, his eyes bright with pride. "You're stepping into the sun, little Lila," he said softly. I smiled, though my heart was racing. "I hope I'm ready," I whispered. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You've been ready your whole life. You just needed someone to notice." That night, I stayed up late, refining my designs and writing notes for the pitch. I read everything I could about sustainable architecture, about the balance between nature and human ambition. My room was a sea of paper and possibility, each line a promise of what could be. And though doubts still lingered at the edges of my mind, I held tight to the quiet conviction that had carried me this far. I was the gardener's niece, yes. But I was also an artist, a dreamer, and maybe, just maybe, a catalyst for something bigger than I'd ever imagined. The morning of the pitch dawned with a sky as clear and pale as a fresh canvas. My uncle gave me a small bouquet of lavender from the garden before I left, the scent calming my racing heart. "For courage," he said, his weathered hand warm on my shoulder. As I walked up the path to the mansion's main wing, the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, but there was also a new kind of strength growing in my chest. It was as if the flowers, the leaves, the earth itself were whispering to me, "Show them what you see." The boardroom was nothing like the greenhouse. It was all glass and chrome, a sleek, modern fortress perched high above the city skyline. Sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished table that seemed to stretch for miles. Around it sat the board members, Men and women in tailored suits, their expressions as cold and measured as the cityscape behind them. Mr. Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on me as I stepped into the room. I took a deep breath and nodded in greeting, though my hands trembled. My heart was pounding so loudly I could almost hear it echo in the silence. "This is Lila," Mr. Hawthorne said, his tone cool but firm. "She has a proposal for how we might address our environmental concerns while strengthening the brand's image." He gestured for me to begin, his eyes steady, as if to say, "You're not alone." I opened my sketchbook and placed it on the table, the pages already worn from days of frantic revisions. I cleared my throat, my voice shaking at first, but I forced myself to speak. "Thank you for your time," I began. "I know I'm not part of this company, but I've spent my whole life in these gardens, watching how nature adapts, how it heals. I believe we can do the same with your brand, by embracing sustainability, not as a burden, but as a promise." A flicker of interest passed through the room, though some of the board members exchanged skeptical looks. I took a breath and continued, laying out my vision: rainwater systems that would reduce waste and add a poetic touch to the properties, green roofs that would lower energy costs while creating a signature look, and partnerships with local artisans and growers to infuse each project with authenticity and heart. As I spoke, I could almost feel the weight of doubt in the room, like wading through water. But I didn't stop. My uncle's words echoed in my mind. "Trust what you see." One man in a charcoal suit leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "That's all well and good," he said, his voice laced with polite skepticism. "But what about the cost? These ideas are unconventional. How can we justify the expense to our investors?" My hands clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I understand your concerns," I said quietly. "But sustainability isn't just about saving the planet. It's about creating lasting value. These designs will differentiate your brand in a market that's hungry for authenticity and purpose. In the long run, it's not a cost, it's an investment in your future." He looked at me for a long moment, then leaned back, his lips pressed into a thin line. Another woman, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, raised an eyebrow. "You're young," she said bluntly. "What makes you so sure you understand what our clients want?" My cheeks burned, but I met her gaze. "Because I've been listening," I said simply. "People want spaces that speak to their souls, not just their status. They want to feel connected, to nature, to something real. And you have the chance to give them that." The room fell silent. Mr. Hawthorne was watching me, his expression inscrutable. I could feel the skepticism still hanging in the air, but I also saw something else. Something that gave me hope. A spark of curiosity, of possibility. I reached for my final argument, my voice steady now. "I know I'm just a gardener's niece," I said, my fingers resting lightly on the sketchbook. "But I believe in this because I believe in beauty that lasts. Your brand can be the bridge between luxury and responsibility, between what was and what could be." Mr. Hawthorne shifted in his chair, his eyes still on me. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of decision. "Thank you, Lila," he said. "We'll take your ideas into consideration." The meeting ended, and the board members filed out one by one, their expressions a mix of intrigue and doubt. I gathered my sketches, my hands trembling, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, Mr. Hawthorne spoke again, his tone softer than I'd ever heard. "Lila, stay a moment." I turned back, my heart in my throat. He walked over to me, his gaze steady and calm. "You did well," he said simply. "They're not easy to convince, but you made them listen. That's more than most people ever manage." My breath caught in my chest, and I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered, "for giving me the chance." He regarded me for a moment, then gave the faintest of smiles. "The chance was yours all along," he said. "You just needed to take it." I left the boardroom with my head held high, my heart still racing but lighter somehow. The walk back to the greenhouse felt like stepping out of a storm into the quiet calm of dawn. My uncle was waiting for me, pruning the rose bushes with the same patient care he gave to everything. He looked up as I approached, his eyes bright with pride. "Well?" he asked, his voice low. I took a deep breath and smiled. I think. I think I showed them what I see. That night, I sat in my room with my sketchbook open on my lap, the pages filled with dreams that no longer felt so impossible. I thought of the boardroom, of the skeptical faces and the flicker of hope I'd seen in Mr. Hawthorne's eyes. And I thought of the gardens, the quiet promise of renewal that lay beneath every seed, every blade of grass. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in my life, I believed that my voice mattered. That maybe, just maybe, the gardener's niece could help change the world. The days that followed the pitch were a strange and suspended time, a quiet waiting that felt like the pause between breaths. I went about my usual routines in the garden, pruning roses and weeding the vegetable beds with my uncle, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that sleek, glass-walled boardroom. Each morning, I woke up with a faint knot in my stomach, wondering if they'd dismissed my ideas as nothing more than the ramblings of a dreamer. The silence from the mansion only deepened that feeling. Mr. Hawthorne had said they'd take my ideas into consideration, but the longer the day stretched on, the more I began to doubt. One morning, as I gathered herbs in the greenhouse, I found myself staring at the rainwater barrel, lost in thought. My uncle noticed the faraway look in my eyes and paused in his work. "You're thinking too much, Lila," he said gently, his hands cradling a pot of lavender. "Things take time to grow, you know. Even the strongest seeds need a moment in the dark before they reach for the light." I managed a small smile, but I couldn't shake the gnawing worry that maybe my seed had been too small to take root at all. That afternoon, I saw Mr. Hawthorne in the distance, striding across the courtyard with his usual purpose. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and he gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, but he didn't stop to speak, and the uncertainty settled deeper in my chest. I told myself not to read into it, that he was a busy man with 1,000 concerns. Still, my mind was a storm of doubt and hope, and each gust of wind seemed to bring a fresh wave of fear that I'd overstepped, that I'd dared to dream too boldly. That evening, I sat in the greenhouse long after the sun had set, the air thick with the sweet scent of jasmine. My sketchbook lay open on my lap, but I couldn't bring myself to draw. Instead, I traced the lines I'd already made, my fingers smudging the graphite as if trying to erase the very ideas I'd so carefully laid out. Maybe it's not enough, I thought. Maybe they'll never see what I see. The silence around me felt like an answer I didn't want to hear. The next day, as I was trimming the rose hedges, Mr. Hawthorne appeared beside me, his presence sudden and sharp as a summer storm. "Lila," he said, his voice calm but direct. "Walk with me." My heart lurched, and I set down my shears, wiping my hands on my apron. I followed him across the gardens, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming lilies. We didn't speak at first, the only sounds the soft crunch of gravel under our feet and the distant hum of bees in the lavender. Finally, he stopped at the edge of the reflecting pool, the water rippling softly in the breeze. "The board is divided," he said, his gaze fixed on the water. "Some see potential in your ideas. Others, they think it's a risk we can't afford right now." My heart sank, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "And you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful, almost gentle. "I see the merit in your vision," he said, "but I have to consider the company as a whole. It's not a decision I can make alone." For a moment, the weight of his words pressed down on me like the heavy summer air. But then he continued, his voice low and certain. "That doesn't mean your ideas have no value, Lila. It means the world doesn't always change as quickly as we'd like. You started something important. Don't let doubt steal that from you." His words were like a balm, soothing the raw edge of my fear. I nodded slowly, drawing a deep breath. "I understand," I said, though part of me still burned with the quiet ache of disappointment. He studied me for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "I've been thinking about your designs," he said, handing it to me. "I made some notes, ideas for how we might adapt them, make them more palatable to the board. My hands trembled as I took the notebook, the leather warm and soft under my fingers. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving me standing by the water's edge with the echo of his words in my heart. That night, I pored over his notes by lamplight, the small script precise and thoughtful. He'd seen things I hadn't, practical adjustments, new angles for my vision that I hadn't considered. It was humbling, and it was also a reminder that even the grandest ideas needed roots in the real world to grow. I stayed up until the stars faded into dawn, rewriting my designs with a newfound clarity. My hands moved with purpose, the fear that had once paralyzed me replaced by a quiet determination. If this was my chance, I was going to make it count. When I finally fell asleep, it was with the notebook still open beside me, its pages a testament to the possibility of change. My dreams were filled with green walls and rippling water, with spaces that felt alive and breathing. I woke with the dawn, the pale light painting the room in soft gold, and I knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't let my voice go silent. My uncle's words echoed in my mind. Things take time to grow. And I was done hiding my seeds in the dark. The next morning, I found Mr. Hawthorne in the greenhouse, his jacket slung over his shoulder as he studied the climbing roses. He looked up as I approached, his eyes meeting mine with a flicker of curiosity. "You've been busy," he said, nodding at the notebook I held. "I have," I said, my voice steady. "I've reworked the designs, taken your notes to heart. I think this could be more than just a proposal. It could be a blueprint for something new." He regarded me for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Show me," he said simply. We spent the morning poring over the sketches together, the greenhouse filled with the soft murmur of our voices. For the first time, I felt like an equal, like someone whose vision mattered. He didn't dismiss my ideas or talk over me. He listened, asked questions, offered suggestions that only made my design stronger. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I realized that this was more than just a collaboration. It was a meeting of minds, a shared belief in the power of change. When we finished, he closed the notebook and looked at me with quiet resolve. "We'll take this to the board again," he said. "But this time, you won't be alone." My breath caught in my throat, and I nodded, my heart beating fast. "Thank you," I said, the words simple but heavy with meaning. He gave a small, approving nod, his eyes warm. "You earned this, Lila," he said. "Now let's show them what you see." The second pitch was nothing like the first. This time, I walked into the boardroom with Mr. Hawthorne beside me, his quiet presence a shield against the doubt that still lingered at the edges of my mind. The room was the same, gleaming glass and polished marble. The city sprawled out beyond the windows, but I felt different. My sketches were no longer fragile dreams scrawled on paper. They were plans, grounded in the practical insights we had forged together. And I could feel that difference in every breath I took. Mr. Hawthorne opened the meeting, his voice calm and authoritative as he addressed the board. "We've asked Lila here today to share an updated proposal," he said, his tone leaving no room for dismissal. "I believe it's a chance to redefine who we are and what we stand for." His words carried weight, and I saw a flicker of curiosity in the eyes of even the most skeptical board members. When he gestured for me to begin, I stepped forward, my hands steady despite the tremor in my heart. I began by speaking of what I'd seen in the gardens, the quiet, persistent force of nature, how it found ways to thrive even in the smallest cracks. I spoke of how that same resilience could be woven into the company's brand, transforming it from a relic of old luxury into a beacon of modern sustainability. My voice grew stronger as I described the tangible benefits of the green roofs, the reclaimed water systems, the partnerships with local artisans that would root each project in authenticity and care. I laid out the numbers, the cost analyses that Mr. Hawthorne had helped me refine, showing how these changes wouldn't just save money in the long term, they would set the brand apart in a world hungry for purpose and responsibility. I could feel the energy in the room shift, the hard lines of skepticism softening into consideration. And with every word I spoke, I felt that quiet determination inside me glow brighter. This was more than a pitch, it was a chance to show them the future I believed in. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence. I held my breath, my eyes scanning the faces of the board members. One by one, they began to nod, the doubt in their eyes replaced by something else, something like belief. A woman with sleek hair and a sharp blazer leaned forward, her voice thoughtful. "It's bold," she said, "but it's also timely. People want this. They're looking for brands that do more than sell. They want brands that care." Another man, his face lined with years of corporate battles, cleared his throat. "It's a risk," he said slowly, "but it's a risk worth taking. We've been too comfortable for too long. The world is changing, and we need to change with it." His words sent a ripple through the room, a quiet murmur of agreement that felt like the first breath of spring after a long winter. Mr. Hawthorne met my gaze across the table, his eyes warm with quiet pride. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it didn't need to be. When the final decision was made, I felt the weight of it settle over me like the sun breaking through clouds. My designs, my vision, had been accepted, not as a novelty or a passing trend, but as the blueprint for the company's future. My heart swelled with a mix of disbelief and quiet triumph. The gardener's niece had shown them a new way to see, and they had listened. After the meeting, Mr. Hawthorne found me in the hallway, his expression calm but his eyes shining with something I recognized as pride. "You did it," he said simply. "You made them see what I saw." I shook my head, a small smile playing at the corners of my lips. "We did it," I said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." He regarded me for a long moment, then gave a quiet laugh, the sound low and warm. "Perhaps," he said, "but you were the one who dared to dream it first." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Construction teams moved in, stripping away the old facades to make way for living walls of green and water gardens that shimmered in the sunlight. Artisans and local growers came with their baskets of color and life, weaving their work into the very fabric of the company's properties. And as the buildings transformed, so too did the company's image, no longer just another luxury brand, but a promise of harmony and hope. I watched it all with a sense of wonder that never fully faded. My uncle walked with me through the newly planted courtyards, his eyes bright as he took in the flowering trees and soft, winding paths. "You've done something beautiful here, Lila," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given them more than just a new look. You've given them a new soul." I smiled, though my eyes prickled with tears. "I only showed them what was already here," I whispered. "The beauty was always waiting to be seen." The final unveiling was a quiet affair, no grand speeches or fireworks, just the gentle unveiling of a space that felt as alive as the gardens that had inspired it. Mr. Hawthorne stood beside me as we walked through the main entrance, his hands in his pockets, a small smile on his lips. "This is what I wanted," he said softly, his voice tinged with wonder. "A brand reborn, not through power or wealth, but through care and vision." I nodded, my heart full. "It's only the beginning," I said. And I knew it was true. The work we'd done was more than just a project. It was a statement, a promise that luxury and responsibility could walk hand in hand. As we stepped into the newly transformed courtyard, the air sweet with the scent of jasmine and rosemary, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. The invisible girl had found her place in the world, and it was as bright and alive as the dreams that had once filled her sketchbook. The days after the grand unveiling were filled with a kind of quiet wonder. I walked through the company's newly transformed properties, each step echoing with the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle trickle of water features that had once only existed in my mind. Clients came and went, their voices hushed with appreciation as they traced the green roofs and admired the sustainable touches that had become the company's new signature. I watched their faces, saw the way their eyes softened, their shoulders relaxed. For the first time, these spaces felt alive, not just cold structures of steel and glass, but places that breathed and grew. Word of the transformation spread quickly. Articles in glossy magazines praised the company's bold move, lauding it as a model for modern luxury that didn't come at the cost of the planet. The once skeptical board members now walked the halls with a new lightness, their voices bright with possibility as they spoke of future projects and partnerships. I would catch snippets of their conversations, words like visionary and groundbreaking, and each time, my heart would flutter with disbelief. To hear those words spoken about something I had once kept hidden in a dusty sketchbook felt like a dream made real. Mr. Hawthorne was different, too. Where once he had moved through the estate with the cold efficiency of a man with no time for beauty, now he walked with a quiet reverence. I would see him pausing to watch the sunlight dance across the living walls, his fingers brushing the delicate leaves as if they were old friends. One afternoon, I found him standing in the new courtyard, his eyes closed as he breathed in the scent of jasmine and rosemary. When he opened them and saw me watching, he smiled. A real, unguarded smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "You've changed this place," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that still surprised me. "And you've changed me." I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. "I only showed you what was already here," I said, my voice as soft as the breeze that rustled the leaves around us. He shook his head, his gaze steady and kind. "No, Lila," he said, "you showed me how to see it." Those words stayed with me long after he walked away, echoing in my heart like a promise. Recognition came in many forms. One morning, as I worked in the greenhouse, a sleek black car pulled up the gravel drive. A woman stepped out, elegant in a simple dress, her hair a silver cascade that caught the morning light. She introduced herself as the editor of an architectural journal and asked if I would be willing to speak with her about the work we'd done. My hands shook as I led her through the gardens, explaining the designs that had grown from my dreams. She listened intently, her eyes kind, and when she left, she pressed a soft leather-bound notebook into my hands. "For your next project," she said, "the world needs more voices like yours." Later that week, I found myself invited to a small gathering in the mansion's library, a reception to celebrate the company's rebirth. The room was filled with people whose names I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines, investors, designers, editors who shaped opinions with a single column. I felt out of place in my simple dress, my hands still faintly stained with earth, but Mr. Hawthorne stood beside me, his presence a steady anchor. When he introduced me, he didn't call me the gardener's niece. He called me the company's visionary partner, and in that moment, I felt every inch of the woman I had become. As the night wore on, I found myself in quiet conversations with people who had once seemed distant and unapproachable. They asked about my process, about how I saw the interplay between nature and luxury, and each time, I answered with the quiet certainty I had found in the gardens. My words were no longer tentative whispers. They were confident, measured truths, each one a thread in the tapestry of what we had built together. And though the doubt still flickered at the edges of my mind, I held it at bay with every word I spoke. My uncle watched from the doorway, his eyes shining with pride. Later, as the guests began to drift away, he pulled me into a hug that smelled of rosemary and fresh earth. "You've done more than just change these walls, Lila," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've planted something in the hearts of everyone who sees this. You've reminded them that beauty and responsibility can be the same thing." I pressed my cheek to his shoulder, tears pricking at my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," I whispered. He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "No," he said, "but you did it with your heart, and that's what matters most." The days that followed were a gentle blur of new possibilities. Mr. Hawthorne and I began discussing future projects. How the designs could evolve, how we could bring this vision to more places, more people. Each conversation was a spark, each idea a seed that I knew would find fertile ground. And though there were still moments when doubt crept in, when I wondered if I was truly enough, I held on to the quiet certainty that had carried me this far. The gardener's niece had become someone who shaped the world, one quiet, persistent step at a time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Hawthorne and I stood in the courtyard, watching the last light catch in the rippling water of the reflecting pool. The jasmine scented the air, and the walls of green seemed to glow in the soft twilight. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "You've done something remarkable here, Lila," he said. "But I hope you know, this is only the beginning." I smiled, my heart full. "I know," I said softly. "There's so much more to grow." As the stars emerged one by one in the velvet sky, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey from the shy girl who hid in the greenhouse to the woman who stood here now had been anything but easy. But it had been worth every step, every moment of doubt and quiet triumph. I had found my voice, and I had used it to bring something beautiful and lasting into the world. And as I looked at Mr. Hawthorne, at the courtyard we had created together, I knew that this was only the start of a story that would continue to unfold, quietly, persistently, beautifully, like the gardens I had always loved. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support more powerful narratives like this. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.